Come out to VWAT's Furniture for a day at the Country Fair with Mom. Aim, throw, and save up to 30% off. Celebrate with Mom at the Country Fair this Saturday at VWAT's Furniture.
Drive a little, save a lot. VWAT's Furniture.
And welcome back to the Livingston Parish News Weekly, a podcast brought to you by the Livingston Parish News. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. I am joined today by my twice-monthly guest, a regular staple, the mayor of Denham Springs. Good morning, sir. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, McHugh. Good to be here again. This is visit number 4.
Yes.
So I'm Gerard, Landry, the mayor of Denham Springs.
We are getting on a roll here in the Livingston Parish News studio. And the last 3 times, we spent most of our time talking about drainage. Today, we're going to talk about something a little different. I hope you guys find it interesting because it is a conversation that goes beyond just the subject property that we're going to talk about today, but we're talking about annexation. The city recently approved an annexation appeal from a property owner. It still has to go to the parish, so we'll talk a bit about the process and a couple other issues with it as well. But first, a little bit of good news, like we like to start off every time. Springfest was a hit.
Oh my gosh, the weather cooperated. There was a little bit of fear early in the day, and I think we had of 160 vendors, about 6 or 8 were no-shows, probably because they had some distance to drive to get here. So it was raining at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and they chose not to participate. We understand totally, but my gosh, we think we had close to 10,000 people there. So it was a wonderful day. It was a great event. People were so excited to be outdoors again. Of course, we've missed both of them, the spring and the fall fest that we had last year. So the vendors were happy. The citizens were happy. A lot of music playing and the food being served. And it was just a great day for all.
A lot of great smells. Missed those fair smells, fair food, right?
Exactly.
And, of course, want to remind folks next Thursday is Cinco de Mayo. A little bit more low-key, as we've talked about, but just want to remind folks that there'll be another opportunity to get out and about, go enjoy some food. The Poppies will be having their usual deal, but they're the only ones inside the city limits, correct?
That is correct. And then we also don't forget we have the mayor's prayer breakfast.
Yes.
Thursday morning, 6:30 at the Council on Aging.
Okay.
And our guest speaker this year is going to be Clarence Buggs. So we're excited to have him join us and our pastors to pray for all of our citizens and for all the aspects of our community, schools and churches and businesses and government. So we're excited to have that. So no tickets, just come 6:30, bring an appetite, and be ready for some prayer.
And that again, that'll be on at the Council on Aging, which is next to what was flooded City Hall, what is now almost a full-fledged pavilion.
Boy, that thing looks so nice too, doesn't it?
It does.
Big, huge timbers and the wood ceiling. The fans were installed this week, and landscaping is coming up next. So we're excited for people to get out there and start utilizing that. Another park, but another opportunity for us to enjoy the outdoors and gather as a community. But I can just think that you can have birthday parties there. The civic organizations can have fundraisers, get-togethers, whatever they want to do. So we just kind of ask that maybe just call the city, and this is not going to be by reservation only, but at least call Joan LeBlanc at the city. Say, look, is anybody using the park this weekend that you know of? And then you can plan your event and go forward from there.
And again, that's at the corner of Mayor Herbert Hoover and why can't I think of
Government?
Government,
Mm-hmm.
Yes. That was Government, or it is Government Street.
Right, 941, I think is the number.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's at 941 Government Street. The Kids Corner is right there on the corner of Government Street and River Road. Council on Aging, and then that on the next corner. So again, getting back into it today, we're talking about annexation. Y'all, that would be the city and the city council, had an appeal from a property owner just outside the eastern city limits wanting to be annexed. So why don't you walk us through some of the background of that?
Certainly. So the request came from New Covenant Baptist Church. It's about a 29-acre piece of property that they had purchased several years ago with the hopes of building a new facility there. For whatever reason, it just hasn't materialized, and they chose to stay in their current location and remodel it, and they have started that process, and it looks significantly better than it has in the past.
Yeah.
So that property has been for sale for a while, and Brandon Thompson purchased, I think, 5 acres of it and built their new funeral home right there. And so that the remaining 29 acres has been for sale. And so Fred Banks and the Denham Springs Housing Authority has approached the New Covenant Church and asked if they could purchase it for the Denham Springs Housing Authority. They got together, they talked and negotiated a deal, went to the real estate folks, and they have a purchase agreement, and everything's contingent upon being able to annex that piece of property into the city. because the housing project has to be within the city limits. It was decades ago when it was formed, and that was one of the criteria that HUD required. So of the 29 acres, about 9.5 acres was already in the city limits. So it's just a matter of annexing the balance of that piece of property into the city, and then we can execute the sale. And HUD can and FEMA, I should say, FEMA can release the funds for Mr. Banks to go ahead and rebuild that facility.
Right, and the facility that we're discussing here, it's interesting. I like to start this explaining it by reminding people, if you remember, and now you probably notice it a lot better, they were launching boats behind what was Albertsons, what's now a vacant building. After the flood, there's a huge incline there.
That's correct.
That you don't notice because it's sort of gradual
Mhm.
on Range Avenue. Down that hill is where the old housing authority was, off to the left. Of course, it flooded. There has now been sort of some proposals to do this, do that. Some of them did not work out, but it had to be inside the city limits, as you mentioned. And of course, there were all sorts of regulations and red tape on the HUD and FEMA side. So this seems to be the best sort of workaround for the situation.
Yes, it does. So the main criteria is when it could not be in a flood zone, it could not be in an X zone. They prefer that it didn't have any water on that piece of property before, and so there's all this criteria that we have to satisfy for HUD to be able to approve it or to approve the site. Now the funding is actually coming from FEMA because HUD is not in the business of building these types of facilities anymore. They're more along the lines of giving people that are in need a Section 8 voucher that they could go rent a piece of property as long as it met the criteria. But this is a facility for elderly and handicapped, what it's always been. But since it's FEMA rebuilding it from the flood, that's why they're going to rebuild it. HUD's not building a new one. So there was 52 units, if I recall, 52, maybe 53, and that's exactly what they're going to replace. And so there's about a $10 million project that's going to be built right there on this new site, hopefully.
And of course, that hopefully, a little bit of local investment, right?
Yes.
Buying some of those materials locally, sales tax, always great. So the other part of this, of course, is annexation. And that is an interesting topic here in the city of Denham Springs. I know that in the past, there have been people, especially south of the city, who have been interested in annexation, but that, not only is that not as easy a process, I think, as people would hope that it was, but it does come with some consequences and issues. So let's first talk about the process, because I know just because y'all, as a city council in a city, accepted to annex that property, it still has to go before the parish council, correct? That
is correct, and that was hand-delivered to the parish council yesterday, and they have a 45-day window to take action or not take action, and of course, at the end of 45 days, we'll know for sure. Unless they choose, now if they chose to vote on it at their next council meeting and they accept it, then it's a done deal. We'll move forward. If they don't, then we'll just wait for the 45 days to expire and assume that there's no opposition, and it would just automatically happen at that point in time.
Sure.
So the other thing that makes this unique in that there's no property owners. There's no residents on that property. There's no voters on that property. It's just a blank slate. And that's what makes the step a whole lot easier.
Sure.
Had it been something like a subdivision right outside the city limits that wanted to be annexed, then you have to go back and it has to go to a vote of the residents there. Complicates it, really draws it out and drags it out to the next election cycle, so we don't have to worry about that particular piece of it.
Sure, which I'm sure is nice for this particular project.
It's exactly right. So when you talk about annexation, from my business background, I always look at annexation. Okay, so if somebody wants to be annexed into the city, what are the benefits and what are the pros and cons? How much is it going to cost us to maintain streets and drainage, fire, police protection? And will that, if the property comes in, will it generate enough dollars to offset the increase? Because it will be an increase, especially if you're talking about a larger subdivision, right?
Sure.
So this is again, it's right outside the city limits already. It's actually in between District 5 and one of our firehouses. So it's located in a great location, fairly close to the community that it was located in before. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Right. I mean, it literally just on kind of going through that part of the neighborhood. It's on the eastern side as opposed to the western side near Range Avenue.
That's exactly right.
It makes sense. So, one of the interesting things, and this is sort of a curveball theory deal that I'm going to throw out there. We know that in 2013, a master plan was drawn up and adopted by resolution by the parish council. Of course, they did nothing with it. The master plan has been readopted by ordinance by the parish council, but of course, they're trying to work through that right now. One of the interesting things that is specified within the master plan of the 2013 version is that the most responsible method of growth, and I'm paraphrasing, folks. Please, if you want to go read the old master plan, it's dense. Have fun, but it does say that the most responsible method of growth for the parish is for basically for Watson to incorporate and Watson, Walker, and Livingston, Denham to all grow responsibly by annexation. Interested in your thoughts on that. Obviously, the landscape has changed since 2013 drastically. Population boom, big flood, among other things. But kind of interested, based on what you just talked about, there's a lot of business decisions that goes into that. I wonder if the people who had drawn up the master plan had ever talked to, that would have been right before you were elected the first time. So Mayor Durbin at the time.
Certainly. I don't know that they had, and I know that the city has annexed properties over the last 10 or 20 years. I think parts of Tate Road, parts of the other end of Rushing, because Arby's was not in the city limits at one time, where at the end of, or behind the old K&B drugstore, Rite Aid, that
Right.
Aspen Square was
Right.
not inside the city limits. And so I think Edgewood at one time. So when all these things were incorporated into the city, they were all brought in as commercial property. Last council meeting, we had to have one person wanted to have their property rezoned from commercial back to residential, and it was on Edgewood. So yes, it has happened. At that time, I don't know what the philosophy was,
Sure.
but for me, it's strictly a dollars and cents kind of a thing. We just need to make sure that it makes sense for us to do so.
Sure.
So that going forward, we'll have to wait and see what the consensus is with the parish and what their plan is. We don't have any great ambition to grow the city much more.
Right.
It just doesn't. It's just not something I've been interested in.
Sure.
So if somebody can share that with me, why we should, I'm all ears.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it doesn't really specify why.
Mhm.
It just said that would be the most responsible. And things have changed at the parish since then. Who knows? Maybe it could have been because of the way they were handling the road program at the time. I'm not real sure.
Exactly.
But I thought it was an interesting phrase, and it was applicable to what we were talking about today, so I wanted to bring it up.
Certainly.
So anything, we got through this a little quicker than I thought we would today, but that's okay. As my dearly beloved likes to say all the time, brevity is a soul of wit, and I need to practice that more often. If anything you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
Well, I think some of the things that we're talking about. As a matter of fact, hopefully at the next council meeting, we'll bring up some of our flood mitigation items that we need to talk about. And the most important would be BFE and freeboard, because as we go through our process after the flood, much like the experience that the parish is going through currently, there are some things that we need to do to make sure that we maintain our CRS rating. We're back to an 8. We'd love to get to a 7. Don't know that we can get there soon, but one of the things that we have to do is implement BFE plus freeboard, and we're leaning towards BFE plus 2 feet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that would be, that's a pretty bold step.
Yes.
But it's something that needs to be done, because if we're going to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, which we have to, we don't really have a choice, because the free market is not where you want to be when it comes to flood insurance.
Right, and we did have a pretty extended discussion yesterday with Parish Councilman Gary Frog Talbert, and one of the things he brought up is the difference between the subsidized National Flood Insurance Program and the actuarial cost if you go to the private market for flood insurance, and it ain't fun.
No, it's not a pretty thing. I've seen it, because I've seen some people that try to go to the private thinking they're going to save money, and they may save money the first year, but then after that they have no controls.
Right.
At least FEMA does have, I think, a 20% max that they can go up or down.
Yeah.
At any given year. So that's some sort of a safeguard. And the biggest thing about National Flood Insurance is that they have to renew you. Private does not have to.
No.
So therefore, after the flood of 16, some people may not have been renewed that had private. I don't think the number was very big, but it could happen. And that's the
Right.
sort of thing that we want to make sure that we try to capitalize on. That we do what we need to do to make sure that our citizens can, number one, buy it, and number one, to buy it and get a discount. Right
Right.
now with an 8, we're able to there you get a 10% discount on your flood insurance policy because of the work that Rick Foster and his group have done, and they've been very, very diligent in it, and they continue to be. I just spoke to Rick just this morning to talk about the next council meeting. You probably will see it. Don't hold my. If it's not the next one, it'll be the one after. But we're bringing forth the BFE plus the free board.
Right. So, and that's interesting because what the mayor is discussing is the CRS, which is the community rating system. It is again a very dense, wonderful piece of literature. I don't know why I put myself through this, but I've read it. I've had many conversations with Mr. Rick Foster about it. It is interesting the way it's developed. It's kind of put together as, there's about 8 different sections that have everything to do with ordinances, like your base flood elevation plus, which is freeboard,
Sure.
all the way to community outreach. And they kind of try to give you this playbook to sort of ease through it and try to work your way up in each section. Right now, the best community, the most adoptive community, let's put it that way, is Jefferson Parish. They have a 5. So
Wow.
That's interesting.
So, like community outreach is some of the things that we have to do. Pamphlets. We have a table full of pamphlets, brochures, educational material right inside City Hall, but also like at Fall Fest this past weekend, on the sidewalk in front of City Hall, we actually had a model set up out there where the kids could learn what types of things they can do to stop the water. And they actually had clay, they had water, cups of water. We had Maika and CJ and Rick and Steve out there working with the kids to show them how they could, in effect, build a wall around the house.
Right.
And they were given little toys if they were. They all got toys, but the whole was they could build something that worked, and they would get a little gift for it. So
got to make sure they stay incentivized, right?
well, whatever it takes, but you have to start the process somewhere. You have to start when they're young, but to plant the seed so that as they go through life, they start to realize, oh, wait a minute, I need to do this. Much like our last 3 discussions about drainage.
I was going to be very snarky after we got done. I was going to say we just can't avoid it. We're going to talk about it at least once.
It is hard to not talk about it because it is still on everybody's mind. We're still suffering from post-traumatic flood syndrome. Every time it rains, we still worry about it. Okay, and we should. We need to be aware of it until we can get everything done. I don't know that we'll ever get to that point. But let's hope that we can make some significant improvements as we go forward with federal dollars that we can spend appropriately and have the drainage situations in our areas taken care of. But it does start where the rubber meets the road. It does start in that ditch in your front yard, and it does make a difference.
It does.
I will tell you, for all the years that you and I have been talking about it, I can see a difference because I can see a difference how? Because my phone doesn't ring as bad as it used to when it rains. I don't get the text messages as bad as I used to. I get legitimate pictures about issues, and we go resolve them.
Yeah.
So that's encouraging to know that we can make a difference.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's part of the deal is like when you hit a point like the flood, it's sort of a flashpoint where suddenly you realize it's not just big problems, as you've said, but it's little problems too.
Certainly.
It's not just about the big picture. And being able to go address those little things as they crop up, it starts to create a bigger picture of a better scenario.
And so the feedback that we get from our citizens, some politicians are afraid, oh my gosh, what do they want or what do they want to talk about? It's okay. It's a problem. And we get paid to solve those problems.
Right.
And we just do the best that we can with the resources that we have. Right.
Right.
And if we don't have the resources, then we try to figure out a way to get more money or to tap into some other vehicle so that we can make it happen.
So we talked annexation and drainage. Couldn't avoid it, but it was not the crux of the conversation today. We'll put it that way. So again, I always enjoy sitting down with the mayor of Denham Springs. Why don't you introduce yourself, if you will?
I'm Mayor Gerard Landry of the city of Denham Springs. That's again, I call it paradise on earth, right?
7.5 square miles right here on the western side of Livingston Parish. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate you guys joining us today and watching. I do want to reiterate what the mayor said. We do see a lot of people interacting with the stories we tell about personal responsibility with drainage. We know that there are big problems, but that garbage flows downstream.
It does.
So it is important, and even garbage in terms of leaves, limbs, all these other things. So we appreciate. I remember when I ran that story that was 3 years ago in 2018 about picking up your garbage. And the first time we had a big spring rain or we knew it was coming, all these people were posting on Facebook, we cleaned up our yard, you clean up yours. It was good to see. So it was good to get that message out. But that's why I always like sitting down with you as well. We always find a story that we never really would have either thought of on our own.
Well, here, look. I was working in my yard Sunday. Guy pedals by on his bicycle, pulls up in my yard, comes all the way across the yard, and says, "You know what I need? I just need the city's help because I can't quite get all the leaves and the growth that has happened on my neighbor's culvert right at the edge of my property. You think you guys can come by?" I said, "Remind me on Monday we get the guys to come by."
There you go.
So it's a group effort, right?
It is, and George is right there at the front of it.
He tries.
So want to remind you folks, yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
I want to remind you guys that we are on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. We are once a week in print on Thursdays at $7 a month to get that in your mailbox. We're also online, www.livingstonparishnews.com. If you're watching this on Facebook, but you want to get them quicker, we do upload these shows to anchor.fm. You can go find us there. It's also on all your podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Google Play. We appreciate one more time you guys joining us today, and we will see you next time.